Okay, so you know how we all toss files around online like it's nothing, right?
Right.
Well, turns out there's a lot more to think about than we realize when it comes to
Mhm.
making sure that stuff stays safe, especially as we move, further into 2025.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for this deep dive, we're going to take a look at what you sent over about SFTP and managed file transfer.
NFT
Exact,
too.
MFT. So we're going to break down the differences between these two and see why that matters so much for both security and, well, just getting things done efficiently. We've got that article from David Heath, MFT versus SFTP, plus a few other pieces.
Yep, those will give us a good foundation.
Yeah, a solid starting point. And I think what we really want to get at here is beyond just the definitions, how do we make sure we're protected against the really serious threats out there,
Well,
like
yeah,
enumeration?
oh, yeah, enumeration, and then how attackers use that to move laterally within a network.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So for everyone listening, think about how you're sending files right now. Are you really confident that your methods are strong enough to deal with these kinds of threats? And are they efficient enough for, the kind of data volumes we're all dealing with these days?
Yeah, great questions to think about.
This deep dive should help clear some of that up.
Yeah.
So let's start with SFTP. What exactly is it in the simplest terms?
Okay, so at its core, SFTP, Secure File Transfer Protocol. It's basically a way to transfer files between computers securely. The secure part comes from using SSH encryption. That's secure shell.
Okay, so SSH is like the backbone.
Exactly. It creates a kind of secure tunnel for your data so no one can snoop on it while it's moving across the network.
So it's like putting your confidential stuff in a locked briefcase instead of just carrying it out in the open.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
Mhm.
And it's definitely a big improvement over older methods that didn't use any encryption.
Right. But even with that encryption in place, it seems that there's got to be more to the story, especially with all the cyber threats we hear about constantly.
So what are some of the things that SFTP doesn't do so well? Let's look at the downsides.
Yeah, you're right. There are some limitations. So, one big thing that David Heath and several other sources mention is that SFTP deployments tend to be decentralized.
Decentralized. So everyone's doing their own thing.
Right. Each server is kind of like its own little island. It's like having multiple security checkpoints, but they're not really coordinated.
So you don't have that one central view of everything.
Exactly. Which means you end up with gaps in your security. It's tough to enforce consistent rules across the board, and it's harder to spot breaches because you're not seeing the whole picture.
Yeah, that lack of central control sounds like a recipe for trouble. What about efficiency, though? Can SFTP handle, the massive amounts of data that companies are moving around these days?
Honestly, not really. Traditional SFTP often involves a lot of manual work. Someone has to kick off the transfer, keep an eye on it, and fix any errors that pop up.
So it's pretty hands-on.
It is, and that can get really inefficient, especially when you're dealing with the sheer volume of data that most organizations have to handle daily.
It's like trying to run a modern shipping company by handwriting every label and tracking every package with pen and paper.
Exactly. It just doesn't scale. And of course, that also increases the chance of human error.
Okay, so we've got management complexities and potential slowdowns. Now let's get to that thing you mentioned earlier, enumeration. David Heath's article highlighted that as a weakness of SFTP. So what is that exactly? Is it like when hackers do their homework before breaking in?
It is. It's basically the recon phase,
Mm.
like when spies gather intel before a mission. So enumeration in cybersecurity is all about systematically figuring out what's on a target system or network, what resources are there, what vulnerabilities exist.
So they're building a map of the territory.
Exactly. And here's the thing with SFTP. While the data inside your files is encrypted during the transfer, the information about those files might not be.
So like the file names, directory structure, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Exactly. It's like if you send a secret message in a locked box, but the label on the box said top secret plans.
Oh, so even if they can't read the message, they still know it's something important.
Exactly. And that gives them a huge advantage. Even if you encrypt your files with SFTP, if an attacker can enumerate your server, they can figure out how your files are organized, where the sensitive stuff is, and how your systems connect to each other.
And then use that to plan their attack.
Right. It turns your secure transfers into potential entry points for them to get deeper into your network.
That's really unsettling for anyone who relies on SFTP. So if SFTP has these downsides, what's the alternative? What's the more robust solution?
That's where managed file transfer, or MFT, comes in.
MFT. Okay, so what is that? How is it different?
Think of it this way. SFTP is like a single secure courier. MFT is the whole logistics company. It manages all aspects of file transfer, from security and automation to compliance and reporting.
This is a much bigger picture.
It is. It's a whole system, not just a protocol. And it can even use SFTP as one of its tools.
So MFT is like the control center, making sure everything runs smoothly and securely.
Exactly. It's a more comprehensive approach to managing how you move data around.
Okay, I like that analogy. So what are some of the specific advantages of using MFT compared to just sticking with SFTP?
Well, one big one is centralized control. Instead of having a bunch of separate SFTP servers, MFT gives you a single platform to manage all your file transfers.
So it's like having a central command center where you can see everything that's going on.
Right, it gives you much better visibility and makes administration way easier. It's like having a single dashboard for all your secure couriers.
That sounds way more efficient and secure. Okay.
Automation is another huge advantage. With MFT, you can automate all sorts of things, like scheduling transfers, triggering them based on events, automatically retrying if there are errors.
So it's like setting things up to run on autopilot.
Exactly. It saves a ton of time and reduces the risk of human mistakes, and it frees up your IT staff to focus on other things.
Sounds like a no-brainer. So how does MFT boost security beyond just the encryption that SFTP provides?
It usually includes a whole suite of extra security measures, like multi-factor authentication, which means users need more than just a password to get in.
Like a fingerprint scan or a code from their phone?
Right. It might also use even stronger encryption protocols than SFTP. And MFT solutions typically have granular access controls, so you can decide exactly who can access which files and what they can do with them.
So it's not just about locking the briefcase, it's about controlling who has the key.
Exactly. It's about adding layers of security to make sure your data is protected at every stage.
That makes sense. Now, what about compliance and audits? How does MFT help with that?
This is a huge plus, especially for companies in regulated industries. MFT platforms usually have really robust logging and reporting features. They track every single file transfer record, who accessed what and when, and generate detailed audit trails.
So if someone comes knocking, asking for proof that you're handling data responsibly, you've got it.
Exactly. You can prove that you're complying with things like GDPR, QPA, PCI, DSS, all those regulations. Plus, those audit trails are super helpful if you need to investigate a security incident.
It's like having a security camera that records everything.
Right. So to sum it up, MFT provides much stronger security, better efficiency, and much easier compliance compared to SFTP.
It sounds like a major upgrade. Okay, so
Yeah.
let's put them head to head. If we compare SFTP and MFT directly, what are the key differences?
All right, let's break it down. Both offer encryption, but MFT often gives you more options and flexibility. SFTP relies on secure authentication, usually with keys, but MFT takes it up a notch with things like multi-factor authentication and digital certificates. Access control in SFTP is usually pretty basic and limited to each server, but MFT gives you centralized control with much finer granularity.
So it's way more precise.
Right. Now, SFTP doesn't do much in terms of automation. It's either very basic or totally manual. But MFT is all about automating workflows to streamline everything. Then there's auditing and logging. SFTP usually has limited capabilities in that area, but MFT gives you extensive customizable logs, which are essential for proving compliance.
Right, that was a big point earlier.
And then scalability. If you need to handle massive amounts of data, SFTP can struggle because it's decentralized. MFT platforms, on the other hand, are built to handle high-volume transfers reliably. And lastly, but crucially, remember that SFTP can be vulnerable to enumeration, which could lead to lateral movement within your network.
Right, we talked about that.
MFT solutions like IBM Sterling Connect Direct are designed specifically to prevent that by controlling access and monitoring activity very closely.
Okay, so that comparison really highlights the advantages of MFT. So why is David Heath stressing the need to upgrade to MFT now as we move through 2025?
Because the cyber threat landscape is constantly evolving. It's getting more sophisticated and more dangerous every day. Relying on SFTP alone is becoming a much bigger risk. The advanced security features in MFT are crucial for protecting against data breaches and unauthorized access.
It's like trying to fight a modern army with outdated weapons.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the efficiency gains from automation are essential for handling the huge amounts of data we all deal with now.
Right, we can't afford to be bogged down with manual processes.
And then there's the growing number of compliance requirements that companies have to meet. MFT makes that much easier.
So it's not just about security, it's about staying ahead of the curve and being able to operate effectively.
Exactly. But going back to security, a key advantage of MFT is its ability to prevent lateral movement, which is a major threat that SFTP can be vulnerable to.
Okay, so let's really break that down. How could an attacker use SFTP and enumeration to move laterally within a network?
All right, so remember, enumeration is that first stage where they gather information. With SFTP, even though the files themselves are encrypted, they might be able to exploit weaknesses to see things like file names and directory structures.
Like figuring out the layout of the building.
Exactly. They're looking for clues about how things are organized and where the valuable stuff is. Plus, SFTP itself can be vulnerable to things like brute force attacks if someone's using weak passwords. And if the SFTP server software is outdated, it might have known security holes that they can exploit.
So they're looking for any cracks in the foundation.
Right. And once they get into an SFTP server, even with limited access, they can start poking around at other systems on the network.
Using that as a starting point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They can use enumeration again to find more weaknesses, like open ports or vulnerable services, and then they can exploit those to jump from system to system, expanding their control until they reach something really critical.
It's like that old saying, give them an inch and they'll take a mile.
That's a good way to put it. An initial small compromise can snowball into a major breach if they can move laterally.
And David Heath talked about IBM Sterling Connect. Direct as an example of an MFT solution that's designed to stop this. How does it do that?
Well, MFT solutions like Connect Direct are built from the ground up with security as a top priority. First, they use strong encryption and authentication for every single transfer.
So every connection is locked down tight.
Right. And they often support a wide range of industry-standard protocols for secure data exchange. But just as important, MFT platforms give you that centralized control and visibility. We talked about that earlier.
So you can see everything that's happening.
Exactly. And that makes it much easier to spot any suspicious activity or attempts to access things that shouldn't be accessed. Plus, Connect Direct has really granular access controls.
Meaning you can get really specific about who can do what.
Right. So even if someone does manage to compromise an account, they can't use it to easily move around the network. And unlike a basic SFTP setup Connect, Direct is designed to limit the amount of information that's exposed to the outside.
So it's much harder for attackers to gather the intel they need for enumeration.
Exactly. It's a much more controlled and secure environment overall.
So the takeaway here is that MFT isn't just about encrypting files. It's about creating a whole secure ecosystem for managing file transfers.
Right. It's about minimizing the attack surface and making it much harder for attackers to gain a foothold and spread.
Okay, so to wrap things up, what's the key message you want our listeners to take away from this deep dive into SFTP and MFT?
The bottom line is this. In today's world, where cyber threats are constantly evolving, relying solely on SFTP with its limitations is a serious risk, especially its vulnerability to enumeration and the potential for lateral movement. Upgrading to a modern MFT solution is no longer optional, it's essential.
It's like upgrading your home security system to match the new threats you're facing.
Exactly. We've seen how MFT offers stronger security, improved efficiency, better compliance, and most importantly, a much lower risk of attackers using file transfers to get a foothold in your network.
Right, and that's really what it all comes down to. Protecting your valuable data from increasingly sophisticated attacks.
So as you think about your own organization's security practices, ask yourself this. Are your current file transfer methods really up to the task of defending against modern cyber threats?
Because the consequences of a breach can be huge.
They can. And it's not just about losing data. It can damage your reputation, disrupt your operations, and cost you a lot of money.
So it's worth investing in the right tools and strategies to protect yourself.
Absolutely. And here's something else to consider. Given how creative and determined attackers are, can businesses really afford to keep relying on older technologies without taking a hard look at their security? And what other foundational technologies might we be overlooking that could have similar hidden weaknesses?
That's a great question to ponder. It's like checking your smoke detectors to make sure they're still working.
Exactly. You need to be proactive about security. So we encourage you to check out the resources we've mentioned, especially David Heath article and information on modern MFT solutions like IBM Sterling Connect, Direct. Take the time to understand how you can implement these enhanced security measures and protect your organization's valuable data.
Because in today's world, being complacent about security is just not an option.
I couldn't agree more.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into SFTP and MFT. We'll see you next time.
See you then.